This is hands down the most expensive PC I have ever built, at just shy of £4,000. This is not just a gaming machine, it is an incredible, all-round, just insane performing beast. It features an AMD Ryzen Threadripper 2950X in a Zenith Extreme motherboard from ASUS. We also have 32 gigs of Corsair Vengeance Pro RGB memory, as well as, and this is probably the important one, the RTX 2080 Ti from ZOTAC. It's the AMP, or the triple fan edition, and it's rather nice. We also have the Corsair 500D with a Corsair H115i Pro cooler with the TR4 mounting bracket, by the way, because that's not included in the box, and that's a purchase separately kind of product. And we also have the Corsair HX 850 power supply as well, which is rather nice and fully modular. And otherwise, I think that's the majority of the bits and pieces. Oh, in terms of SSD, we also have a Corsair MP300 and a 6TB hard drive, so a fair number of kind of options and a fair number of things that kind of inflate the price a fair bit. So now that you know what all the parts for the system are, you're now going to need to know how to put them all together. The first thing that I would do is take your motherboard out and install the CPU. This is a bit more complicated than you're usually used to with AMD or even Intel CPUs, as there is actually a Torx screwdriver that comes in the Threadripper box to undo the 3 screws that hold the pressure plate down. So it's actually listed on the actual pressure plate itself. It goes 1, 2, or 3, or 3, 2, and 1, depending on which, if you're opening or closing, but you undo each of the 3 screws in turn and then have that lift up. You then lift up the carrier tray, which in your case will likely have a blanking plate in there to protect the pins, but otherwise you lift that out, place the Threadripper chip inside that same carrier, and then place it down and have it sort of clip in at the top. You then push the pressure plate back down and screw it in the reverse order, and then there you go, you've installed your Threadripper CPU. I would then recommend that you install the RAM next. This is again pretty simple and the same as you're used to if you built any other PC, so just flick the tab at the top, line up the notch in the slot and the RAM DIMM, and then just place it in and apply pressure evenly on both sides, and that's pretty much it. Make sure that you get a quad channel kit if you're going with a Threadripper system, and make sure that you use the right slots for the given channels on the motherboard. You can check the motherboard manual to make sure you're using the right one. And from there we're going to throw in the M.2 SSD. Now there's actually 3 positions you can put M.2 SSDs, 2 of which are on the DIMM.2 slot that comes with this motherboard, but I'm actually going to put this one under the chipset heatsink, which has a, well, heatsink plate to it. It's not the best heatsink plate, but it is fairly large, so it should be able to at least heat soak a good amount anyway. But otherwise, all you do is take the 3 screws off for the kind of RG fascia plate, and then install the small standoff that comes in the box for the M.2 SSD, push the M.2 SSD in the right orientation, and then use the other screw that comes in the same bag as the little standoff to hold it down. Take off the sort of protective film on the heat pad, and then place it back down, screw it in, and there you go, you're done. So now that we've got everything installed onto the motherboard itself, I'd now recommend actually installing the power supply in the case and routing your wires before you install the motherboard, so that it's a bit of an easier procedure once you do get the motherboard in. In this case, all you have to do is open the rear side panel. I already took off the side panel with a single screw at the top. In fact, I did that for both of them, just for ease of access and ease of filming, but you can leave it on if you fancy. All you have to do to install the power supply is ideally pre-connect your cables. I didn't do this, as you'll see in the footage here, but it's a little bit easier if you do pre-connect your cables, as you know, you don't have to fumble around in a fairly small space trying to plug in some fairly delicate connectors. So with that, once you do that, then all you do is slide it in from the back and push it up to the mounting holes at the back, and then the 4 screws in the back to hold it in place. Next up, I'm going to recommend installing the motherboard in the case. This is also pretty simple, and especially since this motherboard has its I/O shield built onto it, you don't even need to install that. So all you do is make sure that your 980X mounting standoffs are all in the right place, and then place the motherboard in and screw it in where it needs to, and that's pretty much it. Installing a hard drive in this case is pretty simple. There are 2 3.5-inch drive bays that are vertically mounted. All you do is remove the single thumb screw at the bottom and lift them out, and then you put the hard drive in with its circuit board facing outwards, and then have it clip into the bits. There's a couple of screw holes I would recommend you use just to make sure that the hard drive is fully secured in there, not going anywhere, and then other than that, just drop the hard drive back in its place, the little thumb screw through and then connect up your SATA data and then soon to be SATA power wires. The 500D actually has a sort of little channel that you can use for cable management. I removed that so that I can get access to everything that's there and route all my cables first and then reattach that later with some help because it was quite a tight fit. But you can use that to keep the cables nice and tidy, especially since with the 500D you actually have tempered glass on both sides, which means that your cable management job will be inspected by everyone who sees your PC, so just bear that one in mind. Now that the hard drive's in, we're going to throw in the water cooler. This one is both fairly simple and a bit of a pain. So the 500D has a removable water cooling tray or a radiator tray, which is really nice. So a couple of screws will drop that down and then you can, access or you can put your radiator onto that and then put it back up. Now with my setup, especially where I routed my two 8-pin CPU power cables, I had a bit of trouble with the fans kind of crushing those cables a bit, so be careful with how you route your cables in this case, especially if you are using the H115i Pro bus. Otherwise, once you get it up there, it's all fine and good. Once you've got the cooler mounted at the top, you're then going to want to install the Threadripper actual mounting plate to the pump. It's fairly simple, it just twists on and you're all good. You're then going to want to install these small standoffs in the TR4 socket itself, and then you'll go ahead and throw on some thermal paste. Now, do bear in mind that the H115i Pro does come pre-applied with thermal paste, so if you've just bought this system and it's brand new, then it's perfectly fine for you to use the pre-applied paste if you fancy. You can add your own, although make sure you wipe off the pre-applied paste itself, unlike some people, and you only use a fairly small amount rather than actually coating the damn thing and making it swim in it. You only need a small amount just to cover all the small gaps and have good sort of thermal conductivity through, but otherwise you just need a very small amount. And then finally, installing the GPU is very, very simple. All you do is remove the two sort of blanking plates at the back of the case and then make sure that the small tab on the motherboard is pushed down, push the card into it, and then install a couple of screws in the back, and that's pretty much it. Now that we've got all of the hardware installed, we can now connect all of our power supply cables, so our two 8-pins for this motherboard, the 24-pin, as well as any of our other SATA connectors, so for the hard drive, the cooler, and obviously our two 8-pin power connectors for our graphics card as well. You will also want to connect up all of your other connections, so the USB Type-C front panel header and the USB 3 front panel header, all the rest of your front panel headers in general, the audio one down the bottom, and your kind of power reset button and stuff like that. And then connect up any fans that you haven't already, cable manage it a little bit and make it look nice and neat, and then you have an end result which looks very, very aesthetically pleasing. I think that the RGB RAM surprised me and how much I just like the look of it. It's not something that I care too much about normally, and obviously with this case not having the Lightning Node Pro, which I do have one, but I just didn't really feel it fitted with a very, very bright aesthetic when you have all of this tinted tempered glass. But I really do like the look of the RAM and kind of recommend it. Now, of course, we need to know how this thing performs. Let's take a look at a couple of gaming results and then we'll take a look at some other use cases for this system. So starting off with 3D Mark Firestrike, we have some incredibly impressive results here, both at 1080p, 1440p, and especially at 4K. Feel free to check 3D Mark's website to see how those compare. I had some problems with GTA 5 at 1080p, but still 1440p, and especially that 4K result of 106 FPS is incredibly impressive, especially at very high settings. Unity in Heaven is again a little bit lacking on the 1080p side of things, but very impressive on the 4K side with 92 FPS, which is incredibly impressive if you know Unity in Heaven at all. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds testing on ultra settings on the Sanhok map. Again, 1080p and 40p are impressive, but that 78 FPS is nothing to keep quiet about, is very impressive. And again, Fortnite on epic settings. The 1080p number does seem a little bit bottlenecked, but the 40p and especially that 4K number again is incredibly impressive with good minimums and maximums across the board. Now, of course, those game results are impressive, especially thanks to that RTX card, but especially with the Threadripper chip in here, it's not all gaming. I did a BMW render test in Blender to give you an idea of how well the CPU performs, and of course if you want to know more about the CPU or the graphics card itself, I've done separate reviews of both of them if you want to see the performance, but here is the Blender test. It was 2 minutes and 39 seconds, which is incredibly impressive for a CPU render. Now, of course, this system is something that you can game on, obviously, as you saw, very impressive performance, especially at 4K, but you can also do a whole lot more, whether it's 3D modeling and rendering, whether it's video editing, whether it's actually even deep learning and sort of TensorFlow type stuff. Both the CPU and the GPU do a very good job at both of those, and all of that sort of stuff. It's just an incredibly impressive machine. I think this is probably a programmer's dream because they can, have basically zero compile time on any program they write, but then can also boot up some games and have some fun in that too. They would have to write that off as a pretty big business expense, so maybe it's not for everybody. I would love to hear what you think though. What do you think of the system? What do you think of the parts? What do you think of the performance and all that sort of stuff? Let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to leave those down there too. If you want to pick up any of the parts or the full system, then you can check out the links in the description down below. There will be links to everything. So you can check out pricing when and where you watch this as well if you want any of the individual bits, or just see how much it costs where you are overall. I want to give a big thank you to Corsair for the case, the power supply, the cooler, the RAM and the SSD, and the power supply actually, and also a big thanks to actually PC Specialist for the 2080 Ti. Now, of course, this is a system that I'm sort of showing you how to build yourself, but if you don't want to build one of these yourself and you want to just buy one off the shelf, then I've actually got a review of a PC Specialist and Ryzen 2700 and 2080 Ti system that will be coming out fairly shortly, so if you're interested in that, make sure you are subscribed for more videos. Other than that though, thank you for watching. As I said, if you've got any comments, leave them down below. If you want to support the channel and keep me making these videos on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday basis, then do take a look at the links in the description down below. There's Patreon where you can support me directly, or Amazon and Overclocked UK affiliate links, where if you're buying systems, if you're buying parts, or if you're buying garden sheds on Amazon, then all of those massively help me out, so thank you to everyone who uses them. You can also check out Private Internet Access, which is a very cheap but very awesome VPN that I use personally. There's a link down there. There's also Humble Bundle if you fancy some cheap games. And that's kind of it. Thank you for watching. Make sure you check out the other videos over here and subscribe if you're not already. And otherwise, thanks for watching. We'll see you all in the next video.